Montana Territory, 1875. The first frosts of autumn painted the valleys of Elkhorn Creek silver, though the true harsh grip of winter had yet to descend. In this unforgiving land, where survival demanded everything a person had to give, Madeline Everett kept her head down and her expectations lower. At 20 years old, Madeline had long since accepted her place in the frontier town of Timber Ridge. Plain Maddie, they called her, not cruel enough to say it to her face, but the whispers followed her nonetheless. With her mousy brown hair always neatly braided but never quite fashionable, spectacles perched on her nose, and simple calico dresses that hung loosely on her thin frame, she blended into the background of the bustling town. The unmarried daughters of prominent families dismissed her as competition, while eligible men barely registered her presence. Madeline worked as the assistant to the town's aging schoolmaster, Mr. Holloway, helping educate the children of miners, merchants, and ranchers. Though her intelligence was unquestioned, her prospects for marriage, the expected path for a woman of her age, seemed increasingly remote. She told herself it didn't matter. The frontier was no place for romantic notions. What use was love in a land where survival itself required constant vigilance? Better to focus on what she could control. Her work, her small garden behind the boarding house, her books. "You'll die an old maid, teaching other people's children," Mrs. Whitfield, her landlady, often remarked with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. Some women weren't meant for marriage, dear, nothing wrong with that. Madeline had convinced herself this was true, that she didn't want what other young women seemed to pine for. The loneliness that sometimes caught her unawares on cold nights was simply weakness, she told herself. A frontier woman needed to be strong, self-sufficient. Needing others was a luxury she couldn't afford. On this particular morning, Madeline hurried toward the schoolhouse, clutching a stack of primers she'd been mending the previous evening. The town was alive with unusual excitement. Word had spread that the famous Galloway Ranch was sending men to town for supplies and possibly to hire additional hands. "They say Kent Galloway himself might come," she overheard Mrs. Peterson telling the seamstress as she passed the general store. "His father's finally stepped back from running things, young Mr. Galloway's in charge now." Madeline paid little mind to such gossip. The Galloways were the wealthiest family for 100 miles, with a ranch that employed dozens of men and supplied beef to mining camps throughout the territory. They occupied a different world than hers, one of prosperity and prominence that held no place for a plain schoolteacher. The day proceeded like any other until just after the noon hour, when the thunder of hooves announced the arrival of the Galloway party. Madeline was supervising the children's outdoor lunch when several riders appeared on the main street. Even the most rambunctious students fell silent, watching the procession with awe. Leading them was a young man Madeline assumed must be Kent Galloway. At 25, he cut a striking figure atop his chestnut stallion. Unlike the weathered, grizzled cowboys who typically passed through town, Kent maintained a clean-shaven appearance that highlighted his strong jawline. His broad shoulders filled out his dark denim jacket, and even from a distance, Madeline could see the intense focus in his eyes as he surveyed the town. His sandy blonde hair caught the sunlight when he removed his hat to greet the mayor. "Children, please finish your meals quietly," Madeline instructed, trying to redirect their attention. "Mr. Holloway will be displeased if we're late returning to our lessons." But the children, like everyone else in town, remained transfixed by the newcomers. Madeline sighed, resigned to the disruption. As she gathered the younger students, 7-year-old Emma Shaw bolted away, chasing after a scrap of paper that had blown from her lunch pail. "Emma, stop," Madeline called, but the girl was already dashing into the street, directly into the path of an approaching wagon laden with supplies for the Galloway Ranch. Without hesitation, Madeline dropped her books and ran. She reached Emma just as the startled horses reared up, the driver shouting and pulling frantically on the reins. Madeline threw her arms around the child and twisted away, but her foot caught in a rut, sending them both tumbling. She felt a rush of air, heard the thundering of hooves, and braced herself for impact. Instead, she felt strong arms encircle her waist, lifting her and Emma clear of danger. The wagon rumbled past, missing them by inches. Heart-pounding, Madeline found herself looking up into the most startlingly blue eyes she'd ever seen. Kent Galloway had dismounted in an instant, reaching them just in time. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, his voice deep but gentle. I don't believe so," Madeline stammered, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. Her spectacles hung askew, her braid had come partially undone, and dust covered her simple blue dress. "Emma, are you all right?" The girl nodded, wide-eyed but unharmed. That was mighty brave, Kent said, helping Madeline to her feet. You didn't even hesitate. Something in his tone made Madeline look at him directly. There was no mockery in his expression, no dismissal, only genuine admiration. For a disorienting moment, she felt seen in a way she'd never experienced before. Anyone would have done the same, she murmured, straightening her glasses. No, miss, not anyone. His gaze held hers a moment longer before he bent to retrieve her fallen books. You teach at the school. I assist Mr. Holloway, she corrected, reaching for her primers. Their fingers brushed and Madeline felt her cheeks warm. Thank you, Mr. Galloway. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. You know who I am. Everyone in Timber Ridge knows the Galloways, she said with a small smile, gathering Emma close. By now, a small crowd had gathered, including several young women from town who watched the exchange with poorly concealed interest. Madeline felt their stares like physical weights. Maddie Everett, always causing a scene, came Violet Henderson's stage whisper to her friend, nearly got herself and the child killed. Kent's expression hardened as he caught the comment. Before he could respond, Madeline gave him a brief nod of thanks and turned away, shepherding Emma back toward the schoolyard where the other children waited. Miss Everett, Kent called after her. Perhaps we'll meet again before I return to the ranch. Madeline glanced back, puzzled by his words. Why would a man like Kent Galloway have any reason to speak with her again? She offered a polite smile but said nothing, certain he was merely being courteous. She couldn't have known that Kent watched her retreating figure with far more interest than he'd shown to any of the elaborately dressed daughters of Timber Ridge's prominent families who now vied for his attention. Nor could she have guessed that this chance encounter would upend everything she believed about herself and her place in the world. That evening, as Madeline sat on the boarding house porch mending a tear in her dress, she overheard the Henderson sisters discussing the day's events with several other young women from town. Did you see how dusty she was, spectacles hanging off her nose like a scarecrow? Violet laughed. Poor Kent Galloway having to rescue her like that. He's staying through the weekend for the Harvest Festival, another girl added. Father invited him to dinner tomorrow. I've had a new dress made special. Madeline kept her head down, letting her loosened hair fall forward to hide her face. Their words shouldn't hurt, she'd heard similar things for years, but today they stung more sharply. For a brief moment, standing in Kent Galloway's steadying grip, she'd felt something different, something she couldn't quite name but already missed. Foolish, she whispered to herself. Focus on what matters. The next day brought unexpected change. As Madeline dismissed her students for the weekend, Mr. Holloway called her into his office, his weathered face grave. Miss Everett, I fear I must take leave for several weeks. My sister in Denver has fallen ill, and I must attend to her. He patted his white beard anxiously. The school board has agreed that you should continue teaching in my absence. Madeline's eyes widened. Alone, but Mr. Holloway, I've never. You're more than capable, my dear. You've been handling most responsibilities already this past year. His rheumy eyes softened. It's time you received proper recognition for your abilities. Pride and panic warred within her. I'll do my best, sir. As she left the schoolhouse, lost in thought, a familiar voice startled her. Miss Everett, I was hoping I might find you here. Kent Galloway stood beside his horse, hat in hand. Without the chaos of the previous day, Madeline noted how his presence seemed to fill the space around him. He wore simple clothes, a blue cotton shirt, dark vest, and denim trousers, but they were of finer quality than most men in Timber Ridge could afford. Mr. Galloway, she acknowledged, clutching her books tighter, is there something you need? His smile was disarming. I came to inquire after the brave schoolteacher who risked herself for her student yesterday. I'm merely Mr. Holloway's assistant, she corrected automatically. Not anymore, from what I hear. The mayor mentioned the old schoolmaster's departure just now. Kent fell into step beside her. Sounds like you've earned a promotion. Word traveled fast in small towns. Madeline adjusted her spectacles nervously. Temporary, until Mr. Holloway returns. They walked in silence for a few paces before Kent spoke again. I understand you're quite educated. The mayor speaks highly of your knowledge. I was fortunate. My father believed girls should be educated as thoroughly as boys. She glanced at him, curious about his interest. He was a professor before we moved west. After he and mother died of fever, I stayed on here." Kent's expression softened with genuine sympathy. How long ago? 3 years this winter. Madeline was surprised by her openness with this virtual stranger. Something about his direct gaze made dissembling feel impossible, yet you continued alone, teaching other people's children. She stiffened slightly. "I'm not alone, I have my students, my work." Kent studied her for a moment. "I didn't mean it unkindly, Miss Everett. I admire your resilience." They had reached the corner where she would turn toward the boarding house. "Will you attend the Harvest Festival tomorrow?" he asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. "I help organize the children's activities in the afternoon, but I don't usually stay for the evening dance." "Why not?" His directness made her uncomfortable. The truth that no one ever asked her to dance, that she sat alone watching others enjoy themselves, that she'd stopped putting herself through the humiliation years ago, was too painful to articulate. "I prefer quiet evenings with my books," she said instead. Something in his expression told her he didn't believe her, but he didn't press. Instead, he nodded respectfully. "Perhaps I'll see you tomorrow then." "Good day, Miss Everett." As she watched him mount his horse and ride toward the center of town, Madeline felt distinctly unsettled. Kent Galloway saw things about her that she preferred to keep hidden. Worse, his interest made no sense. Men like him didn't notice women like her, not when Timber Ridge offered prettier, more suitable prospects. "Don't be ridiculous," she chided herself. "He's simply being polite after yesterday's incident." That night, lying in her narrow bed, Madeline found herself imagining what it might be like to attend the dance, to have a handsome partner looking at her the way Kent had looked at her today, as if what she said actually mattered. The fantasy was so unexpected, so contrary to the practical approach she'd adopted toward her life, that it frightened her. "The frontier is no place for romantic notions," she whispered to the darkness, repeating her mantra. But for the first time in years, the words rang hollow. The Harvest Festival transformed the usually practical town of Timber Ridge into a place of color and celebration. Farmers and ranchers from miles around gathered to give thanks for another year of survival in the harsh Montana territory. Stalls selling food, handicrafts, and frontier necessities lined the main street, while bunting and lanterns created festive atmosphere. Madeline spent the morning helping set up the children's games area before returning to the boarding house to change. Her wardrobe consisted primarily of serviceable dresses appropriate for teaching, but in the back of her trunk lay one garment she rarely wore, a dress her mother had insisted she pack when they headed west. "Every woman needs one beautiful thing," her mother had said. The dress was a deep forest green that complemented her eyes, with a fitted bodice and modest lace trim at the collar and cuffs. She'd never found an occasion worthy of wearing it in Timber Ridge. Today, she hesitated before the trunk, telling herself it was foolish to draw attention to herself. In the end, practicality won out. She donned her usual blue calico and pinned her brown hair into its customary braid, though she took extra care with it. Vanity was a luxury frontier women couldn't afford, she reminded herself. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity as Madeline supervised sack races, apple bobbing, and storytelling for the town's children. She was so absorbed in her duties that she didn't notice Kent's arrival until a ripple of excitement passed through the crowd. He stood with several of his ranch hands, watching the children's competitions with evident amusement. Unlike yesterday, he wore a white shirt with a black string tie under his vest, clearly dressed for the evening's festivities. Even from a distance, Madeline could see how the young women of Timber Ridge gravitated toward him, offering refreshments and conversation. "Miss Everett, watch me," young Billy Thompson called, drawing her attention back to the three-legged race about to begin. "I'm watching Billy," she assured him, deliberately turning her back on the scene across the square. As the afternoon waned, Madeline began packing away the game equipment. Most families had moved toward the large open area where tables laden with food awaited, and the band was setting up on a small platform for the evening dance. "You've done a remarkable job with the children." She startled at Kent's voice, nearly dropping the box of prizes she carried. "They mostly entertain themselves," she demurred. "I just make sure no one gets hurt." Kent took the box from her hands. "Where does this go?" "The storage room behind the schoolhouse, but you don't need to." "I insist," he nodded toward the school. "Light the way." As they walked, Madeline was acutely aware of curious glances following them. Kent seemed oblivious, asking questions about her teaching methods and the books she used. His genuine interest in education surprised her. "My father believed ranching required as much intelligence as any profession," he explained. "He made sure I received a proper education before I took over the family business." "That's unusual," Madeline observed. "Most ranchers I've met pride themselves more on practical skills than book learning." "Both have their place." His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "A man or woman who can think critically is never at a disadvantage, whether facing a stampede or a business negotiation." After depositing the supplies, they emerged to find the square transformed by lantern light. The band had started playing, and several couples already moved in time to the music. "Will you stay for the dance after all, Miss Everett?" Kent asked, his tone casual but his eyes intent. Madeline hesitated. "I should return to the boarding house. I have lessons to prepare for Monday." "Surely even dedicated teachers deserve one evening of enjoyment." He held out his arm. "Would you do me the honor of joining me for supper first?" She stared at him, bewildered by the invitation. Over his shoulder, she could see Violet Henderson and her friends watching with undisguised shock. "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Kent's brow furrowed. "Why what?" "Why would you want to spend your evening with me when half the young women in Timber Ridge would gladly accept your invitation?" The directness of her own question mortified her, but she couldn't retract it. Something shifted in Kent's expression, a mixture of surprise and what might have been respect. "Because those women see Kent Galloway, ranch owner, you see a person," his voice lowered. "And because I find myself wanting to know the woman who faces down runaway wagons without a thought for herself, who educates children with such dedication, who carries herself with quiet dignity despite the unkindness of others." Madeline felt heat rise to her face. His perception unnerved her. "I'm not what you think," she said softly. "I'm just a plain schoolteacher who knows her place." Kent's expression hardened. "Your place, and who determined that, Miss Everett?" "The gossips of Timber Ridge." Before she could respond, Mayor Peterson approached, accompanied by his daughter Eleanor in a frilly pink dress. "Galloway, there you are." Eleanor's been hoping for an introduction. The mayor beamed, oblivious to the tension between them. "Miss Everett, don't let us keep you from your evening." The dismissal was clear. Madeline stepped back, the familiar invisibility settling over her like a cloak. "Good evening, Mr. Galloway," she said formally. "Thank you for your assistance." She turned away, ignoring the flash of frustration in Kent's eyes. This was how the world worked. Men like Kent Galloway ended up with beautiful women like Eleanor Peterson, not plain schoolteachers who lived in boarding houses. The sooner she remembered that, the better. Yet as she walked away, Kent's words echoed in her mind. Who had determined her place? When had she accepted the judgment of others as the final word on her worth? The boarding house was quiet when she returned, most residents still at the festival. Madeline lit a lamp in her small room and sat at the window, watching distant lanterns glow in the gathering darkness. The sound of music drifted on the evening breeze. Her gaze fell on her trunk. With sudden determination, she opened it and removed the green dress, laying it across her bed. Perhaps it was foolish. Perhaps she would only embarrass herself further, but for once she wanted to silence the voices, both those of the town and the critical one in her own mind, that told her to remain invisible. 20 minutes later, she slipped out of the boarding house, her heart racing. The green dress fit perfectly, emphasizing her slender waist and bringing out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. She'd removed her spectacles, though it meant the world was slightly blurry at a distance. Her brown hair hung in loose waves down her back, freed from its customary braid. As she approached the town square, her courage nearly failed. The dance was in full swing, with couples twirling under the lantern light while others socialized around the perimeter. She paused in the shadows, searching the crowd. Kent stood with a group that included the mayor's family, though his attention seemed elsewhere, his responses to Eleanor's animated chatter perfunctory at best. When he glanced up and saw Madeline at the edge of the gathering, he went still. For a moment, she feared she'd made a terrible mistake. Then he excused himself from the group and walked directly toward her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You came back," he said simply when he reached her. "I decided I could spare one evening," Madeline replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Though I'm afraid I've left my spectacles behind, so you'll have to forgive me if I seem unfocused." A slow smile spread across Kent's face. "You look beautiful, Miss Everett." The words hung between them, sincere and uncomplicated. No one had ever called Madeline beautiful before. "Thank you," she managed. "Though I'm still just a schoolteacher in a different dress." "A remarkable schoolteacher," he corrected, offering his arm. "Would you care to dance?" The band had begun a waltz, and couples moved to take their places. Madeline hesitated, then placed her hand on Kent's arm. "I should warn you, I'm not very practiced." "I'll lead," he promised. "Trust me." As Kent guided her onto the dance floor, Madeline felt the stares of the townspeople like physical pressure. Whispers followed them, and several dancers nearly missed their steps watching the unlikely pair. "Everyone is looking," she murmured. "Let them," Kent replied, his hand warm and steady at her waist. "I'm only concerned with one person's opinion tonight." His confidence steadied her, and after a few tentative steps, Madeline found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the dance. Kent was an excellent partner, guiding her with subtle pressure, making her feel graceful despite her inexperience. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked, curious. "My mother insisted." She said a gentleman should never embarrass a lady on the dance floor. His expression softened with memory. "She was determined I wouldn't become an uncultured rancher, despite my father's best efforts." "She succeeded," Madeline observed. "You're very different from most men I've met in the territory." "As are you from most women," his gaze held hers. "Most people come west to escape or to conquer. You came to build something." His perceptions startled her. "How could you possibly know that?" "I see how you are with the children, how you've created a life of meaning here despite your losses." The music drew them closer together. "That takes a special kind of courage." The waltz ended, but Kent didn't release her hand. Instead, he led her toward the refreshment table, where he filled 2 cups with punch. "I have a confession to make," he said as they moved to a quieter corner. "I asked about you after our first meeting. The mayor's wife was quite informative." Madeline winced. "I can imagine what Mrs. Peterson had to say." "Actually, she spoke highly of your teaching abilities, though she seemed to think it a shame you hadn't secured a husband." His tone made clear what he thought of that assessment. "She couldn't understand why someone with your education would choose to remain in Timber Ridge." "It wasn't exactly a choice," Madeline admitted. "After my parents died, I had nowhere else to go. The teaching position offered security, if little else." Kent studied her. "And now, if you could choose." The question caught her off guard. She'd stopped thinking of her life in terms of choices long ago. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've become accustomed to thinking of myself as," she trailed off, embarrassed. "As what others see," Kent finished for her. "The plain schoolteacher who knows her place." His use of her own words made her flush. "It's easier that way." "Easier perhaps, but not truthful." His voice was gentle but firm. "The woman I danced with tonight is neither plain nor confined to any place others might assign her." Before Madeline could respond, Violet Henderson approached, her expensive blue dress rustling with each step. 2 other young women flanked her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "Kent Galloway, you've been monopolizing our schoolmistress all evening," Violet said with a brittle smile. "How charitable of you to ensure even Miss Everett enjoys the festivities." The deliberate cruelty of the comment hung in the air. Madeline felt her momentary confidence crumbling. "There's nothing charitable about enjoying the company of an intelligent, accomplished woman, Miss Henderson," Kent replied, his tone hardening, "though I understand such qualities might be difficult for you to recognize." Violet's smile faltered. "I only meant—" "I know exactly what you meant." Kent's voice remained level, but his eyes had cooled. "If you'll excuse us, Miss Everett promised me another dance." He led Madeline away, leaving Violet sputtering behind them. Once they were out of earshot, Madeline gave a shaky laugh. "That was unnecessarily gallant." "Not unnecessary," Kent countered, "and not entirely gallant. I meant every word." The band had started a livelier tune, and couples formed lines for a reel. Kent raised an eyebrow in question, and Madeline found herself nodding. As they took their places in the set, she realized she was genuinely enjoying herself for the first time in years. The evening passed in a whirl of dances, conversations, and shared laughter. Kent introduced her to several of his ranch hands, treating her with a respect that made others reconsider their assumptions. By the time the band played its final song, a slow waltz under the stars, Madeline felt transformed, not by her dress or Kent's attention, but by the realization that she had allowed others to define her for too long. "May I escort you home?" Kent asked as the crowd began to disperse. The walk to the boarding house was short but unhurried. They spoke of books they'd both read, of the challenges of ranching in Montana winters, of dreams deferred but not forgotten. "I plan to establish a proper library at the ranch," Kent confided. "My father thought it frivolous, but I believe access to knowledge is essential, even perhaps especially on the frontier." "That's a wonderful ambition," Madeline said warmly. "Your ranch hands are fortunate." They reached the boarding house steps too soon. Madeline turned to face him, suddenly shy again. "Thank you for a lovely evening, Mr. Galloway." "Kent," he corrected. "And the pleasure was mine, Madeline." The sound of her full name in his voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. "Will you be returning to your ranch tomorrow?" she asked, trying to mask her disappointment at the thought. "Not quite yet. I have some business with the sawmill that will keep me in town a few more days." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you consider showing me your school on Monday? I'm interested in your teaching methods." The request surprised her. "Of course, if you wish, though I'm afraid it's quite humble compared to what you might be accustomed to. I find value is rarely measured by appearances." His gaze was intent. "Something I believe we both understand." As he bid her good night, Kent lifted her hand and pressed a brief kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so unexpected and gentle that Madeline found herself speechless. She watched him walk away, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched. Inside her room, Madeline carefully removed the green dress and hung it where she could see it. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to acknowledge a dangerous feeling, hope, not for romance, that seemed too presumptuous, but for the possibility that she might be more than what Timber Ridge had decided she was. The feeling was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Monday morning dawned clear and cool. Madeline arrived at the schoolhouse early, her stomach fluttering with nerves at the prospect of Kent's visit. She'd taken extra care with her appearance, wearing her best teaching dress, a navy blue with white trim, and arranging her hair in a neat but becoming style. The children arrived in their usual boisterous fashion, though several gave her curious looks. "You look different, Miss Everett," 10-year-old Sarah Miller observed, "pretty like at the dance." Word had clearly spread about her evening with Kent. Madeline smiled, but redirected the girls' attention to her studies. The morning lessons proceeded smoothly until just before noon, when the schoolhouse door opened to admit Kent. The children immediately straightened, excitement rippling through the room. "Mr. Galloway," Madeline greeted him with what she hoped was professional composure. "We're honored by your visit." Kent removed his hat, revealing slightly rumpled blonde hair. "I hope I'm not interrupting, Miss Everett." "Not at all. We were just discussing the history of the Montana Territory." She turned to her students. "Perhaps Mr. Galloway might answer some questions about ranching in our region." The suggestion led to an enthusiastic half-hour of questions from the children, which Kent answered with patience and humor. Madeline watched, impressed by his ease with her students and his knack for explaining complex ranching operations in terms they could understand. When the noon bell rang, she dismissed the children for lunch, leaving her alone with Kent in the suddenly quiet schoolhouse. "You have a gift for teaching," he said, examining the maps and charts she'd created for the walls. "These children are fortunate." "Thank you," she replied, gathering papers from her desk, "though I'm not sure everyone in town would agree. Many see education, especially for girls, as an unnecessary luxury on the frontier." Kent's expression hardened. "Short-sighted thinking. The future of the territory depends on educated citizens." He moved closer, his voice softening. "I meant what I said about establishing a school on my ranch. Most of my hands have families, and the nearest school is too far for daily travel." Madeline looked up, surprised. "You're serious about this?" "Completely. In fact," he hesitated, then continued, "I came today not just to see your teaching methods, but to discuss a proposition." Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. "What sort of proposition?" "The Galloway Ranch needs a teacher, someone who understands frontier life but values education, someone with both intelligence and compassion." His eyes held hers. "Someone like you." Madeline stared at him, speechless. "You want me to teach at your ranch?" Yes, I can offer a proper schoolhouse, better accommodations than your boarding house, and twice your current salary. His expression was earnest. The position would be yours for as long as you wish it. The offer was unexpected and generous, too generous. Why me? She asked, the question that had haunted her since the harvest festival. Surely there are more qualified teachers. Kent stepped closer. Because in 2 days I've seen what this town has failed to recognize in years. Your extraordinary Madeline Everett. Your intelligence, your dedication, your quiet strength, these are rare qualities anywhere, but especially here. His words left her breathless. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. Visit the ranch this weekend. See what we're building there before you decide. The invitation hung between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Madeline knew accepting meant more than considering a teaching position. It meant acknowledging that her life could be different, that she could be different from what she'd resigned herself to. Yes, she said finally, I'll visit. The smile that lit Kent's face made her heart leap. Before he could respond, however, the schoolhouse door burst open and Mayor Peterson entered, followed by several town council members. Galloway, been looking all over for you. The mayor's gaze flickered between them, noting their closeness with obvious disapproval. We need to discuss the timber contract before you leave town. Kent reluctantly released Madeline's hand, though his eyes promised they would continue their conversation later. Of course, Mayor. Miss Everett and I were just discussing educational matters. The mayor's expression made clear what he thought of that explanation. Well, we've got business matters to discuss now. Miss Everett, I'm sure you have duties to attend to. The dismissal was familiar, but for once, Madeline refused to shrink from it. Indeed I do, Mayor. Preparing the next generation of citizens is no small responsibility. Kent's eyes glinted with approval as he donned his hat. I'll make arrangements for your visit, Miss Everett. My foreman will bring details later this week. After they departed, Madeline sat at her desk, her mind whirling with possibilities. The prospect of leaving Timber Ridge both thrilled and terrified her. She'd built a life here, limited though it was. What awaited her at the Galloway ranch was unknown, especially the nature of her relationship with Kent himself. Was she reading too much into his interest? Perhaps he genuinely sought only a teacher for his workers' children. The thought brought both relief and a surprising pang of disappointment. The rest of the week passed in a blur of lessons and preparations. Word of Kent's offer spread quickly through town, generating reactions that ranged from disbelief to outright hostility. Stealing our schoolteacher, Mrs. Peterson complained loudly at the general store, as if Timber Ridge doesn't matter compared to the almighty Galloways. Others viewed the development with knowing smirks, certain that Kent's interest was of a personal nature. Violet Henderson took particular pleasure in sharing her opinion. He'll tire of his plain little schoolteacher soon enough, Madeline overheard her telling friends outside the millinery shop. Men like Kent Galloway might amuse themselves with novelties, but they marry for advantage. The comments stung, but Madeline found herself increasingly able to dismiss them. Whatever Kent's motives, the teaching position offered her an opportunity she couldn't ignore, a chance for a new beginning. On Friday afternoon, as promised, Kent's foreman arrived with a note detailing arrangements for her visit. She was to be ready at 8 the following morning. Kent would send a buggy to transport her to the ranch, where she would stay overnight in the guest quarters before returning Sunday evening. That night, as Madeline packed a small valise, Mrs. Whitfield knocked at her door. Quite the stir you've caused, the landlady said without preamble. The whole town's talking. Madeline folded a shawl carefully. People always talk, Mrs. Whitfield. True enough, the older woman studied her with shrewd eyes. But this time they're talking about possibilities, not limitations. That's different. The observation was perceptive. Madeline glanced up. What do you mean? For years, this town's decided who you are. Now you're deciding for yourself. A rare smile softened Mrs. Whitfield's features. About time, I'd say. With that surprising encouragement, the landlady departed, leaving Madeline to ponder her words. Was that what unsettled the town? Not that she might leave, but that she was exercising her own choice in the matter. Saturday dawned bright and clear, a perfect autumn day for traveling. Madeline wore her green dress again, with a warm woolen shawl against the morning chill. When the buggy arrived, driven by a friendly ranch hand named Thomas, she felt a flutter of anticipation unlike anything she'd experienced in years. The journey to the Galloway Ranch took nearly 2 hours, winding through spectacular mountain scenery. As they crested a final ridge, the ranch spread before them, a sprawling complex of buildings nestled in a verdant valley, with snow-capped peaks rising behind. "Quite a sight, ain't it?" Thomas grinned. "Prettiest ranch in the territory, if you ask me." It was indeed impressive. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure built of squared logs and stone, with wide verandas and large windows. Nearby stood a bunkhouse, barns, stables, and various outbuildings, all well-maintained and arranged with practical efficiency. Beyond, pastures stretched toward distant mountains, dotted with cattle. "How many people live and work here?" Madeline asked, trying to estimate the potential student population. "About 30 hands year-round, more during busy seasons. Most got families living here too." "I'd say there's 15, maybe 20 young'uns that could use schooling." Thomas steered the buggy toward the main house. "Boss is mighty keen on education. Been talking about a proper school since he took over from his pa." They pulled up before the main house, where Kent himself waited on the steps. Seeing him in his element, confident and at ease on his own land, Madeline was struck anew by the contrast between them. He was the territory's most eligible bachelor, master of all this, while she owned little more than her books and clothing. Yet when he smiled and moved forward to help her from the buggy, none of that seemed to matter. "Welcome to Galloway Ranch," he said, his hand warm around hers. "I trust the journey wasn't too taxing." Not at all. The scenery was magnificent. She glanced around at the bustling activity of the ranch. "Your home is impressive." "Thank you. I hope you'll feel welcome here." He offered his arm. "Would you like to refresh yourself before the tour? Mrs. Byron, our housekeeper, has prepared a room for you." The main house was as impressive inside as out, spacious and well-appointed, with quality furnishings that spoke of prosperity without ostentation. Mrs. Byron, a motherly woman with silver-streaked dark hair, greeted Madeline warmly and showed her to a comfortable guest room overlooking the mountains. "Take your time, dear. I'll have refreshments ready when you come down." The housekeeper's kind manner immediately put Madeline at ease. After washing away the dust of travel and straightening her hair, Madeline descended to find Kent waiting in a comfortable sitting room. He'd changed from his work clothes into a clean shirt and dark waistcoat, though he maintained the practical dress of a working rancher rather than affecting the airs of an Eastern gentleman. "I thought we'd start with the site I've chosen for the school," he said after they'd enjoyed Mrs. Byron's excellent coffee and biscuits. "Then to the rest of the ranch, if you're interested." The proposed school site was perfect, a gentle rise near the workers' cottages with views of both mountains and valley. Kent described his plans with enthusiasm, detailing the building he envisioned and the equipment he would provide. "The lumber's already ordered," he explained. "We could begin construction immediately if you accept the position." "You seem very certain I will," Madeline observed with a smile. Kent's expression grew serious. "Hopeful, not certain. I understand what I'm asking you to leave behind. A boarding house room and a town where I'm barely noticed." The words came out more bitter than she intended. "A place you've called home for years," he corrected gently. "Familiar surroundings, students you care about." His consideration touched her. Yes, there would be losses, but also gains. They continued their tour, visiting the stables, workshops, and gardens that made the ranch nearly self-sufficient. Everywhere they went, workers greeted Kent with evident respect and regarded Madeline with curious interest. "Word spreads fast on a ranch," Kent explained as they walked back toward the house for lunch. "Everyone knows you might be our new teacher." "And what do they think of that prospect?" "They're hopeful. Most have children who have had little formal education." He guided her around a muddy patch in the path, his hand light at her elbow. "Several of my hands can barely read themselves." "They want better for their children." The afternoon brought introductions to many of the families living on the ranch. Madeline met potential students ranging from 5 to 16 years old, asking questions and gauging their current knowledge. By the time they returned to the main house for dinner, she had a clear picture of the educational needs facing her if she accepted the position. Dinner was served in a handsome dining room with views of the sunset-painted mountains. Kent sat at the head of the table, with Madeline to his right and his foreman, Michael Daniels, to his left. Mrs. Byan had prepared an excellent meal that rivaled anything Madeline had tasted in Timber Ridge's finest homes. "What do you think of our little kingdom, Miss Everett?" Michael asked as they enjoyed apple pie for dessert. "Different from town life, I expect." "Very different," she acknowledged, "but in good ways. There's a sense of purpose here. Community." Kent's expression warmed at her words. "That's what we're building, not just a profitable ranch, but a place where people can build lives with dignity." After dinner, they retired to the sitting room, where a fire crackled welcomingly against the evening chill. Michael excused himself, leaving Madeline alone with Kent for the first time since her arrival. "You've created something remarkable here," she said, genuinely impressed. "Your father must be proud." A shadow crossed Kent's face. "My father built a profitable ranch. What I'm trying to build is something more." He hesitated, then added, "We didn't always see eye to eye on how workers should be treated or on the importance of education. Yet he educated you well. Because I was a Galloway." He didn't see the need to extend the same opportunity to others. Kent stared into the fire. "When he retired last spring, the first thing I did was raise wages and begin planning improvements to the workers' housing. The school is the next step." Madeline studied him with growing admiration. "That explains why you need a teacher so urgently." "Partly," Kent agreed, meeting her gaze. "But it doesn't explain why I want that teacher to be you." The directness of his statement sent heat flooding to her face. "I still don't understand that myself." Kent set his coffee cup aside and moved to sit beside her on the settee. "From our first meeting, you've intrigued me, Madeline. Your courage, your intelligence, the way you see beyond appearances to what matters." His voice lowered. "The way you've endured the small cruelties of that town without becoming cruel yourself." "You make me sound far more admirable than I am," she protested. "I've survived nothing more." "No, you've preserved something essential, your capacity to care, to dream, to believe in possibilities." He reached for her hand, his touch sending a tremor through her. "Do you know how rare that is, especially on the frontier?" Madeline wanted to believe him, to see herself through his eyes, but years of invisibility and dismissal had left deep marks. "The teaching position," she said, redirecting the conversation to safer ground. "If I were to accept, when would you want me to begin?" Kent allowed the change of subject, though his eyes told her the deeper conversation wasn't finished. "As soon as you're able. The school building will take several weeks, but you could start teaching in the meeting room until it's completed." They discussed practical details, salary, accommodations, supplies, until the mantel clock chimed 9. Madeline stifled a yawn, the long day catching up with her. "I've tired you out," Kent said apologetically. "We should continue tomorrow after you've rested." He walked her to the foot of the stairs where he paused, his expression suddenly uncertain. "I hope you'll consider my offer seriously, Madeline, not just the teaching position but," he hesitated, "the possibility of a new beginning for both of us." The implications of his words hung in the air between them. Before she could respond, he lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her palm, a gesture so intimate it left her breathless. "Good night," he murmured, releasing her hand. "Sleep well." In her room, Madeline stood by the window, gazing at moonlight silvering the distant mountains. Kent's words echoed in her mind, along with the memory of his touch. What was happening between them transcended a simple job offer, yet she feared trusting it. Men like Kent Galloway didn't fall in love with plain schoolteachers, did they? But she wasn't just a plain schoolteacher anymore, or rather, she was beginning to see that plain had never been the truth of her, only the label others had applied. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. The next morning brought more conversations with ranch families and a thorough discussion of curriculum needs. By midday, Madeline had a clear vision of what building a school at Galloway Ranch would entail, the challenges and the tremendous rewards. After lunch, Kent suggested a ride to see more of the property. Madeline hesitated, admitting she had little experience on horseback. "We can take a buggy," he offered, "but there's a view I'd like to show you that's only accessible on horseback. I promise to choose our gentlest mare for you." The mare, a sweet-tempered chestnut named Daisy, proved as docile as promised. With Kent's patient instruction, Madeline soon felt comfortable enough to follow him along a winding trail that climbed steadily into the foothills. The late October day was perfect for riding, crisp and clear, with the scent of pines sharp in the air. As they climbed higher, the valley spread below them like a painting, the ranch buildings small in the distance. "It's breathtaking," Madeline said when they paused at a scenic overlook. Kent dismounted and helped her down, his hands firm at her waist. "This is my thinking spot. When decisions need making, I come here for perspective." They stood side by side, absorbing the magnificent view. After a comfortable silence, Kent turned to her. "Have you decided about the teaching position?" Madeline took a deep breath. "I'm inclined to accept, but, he prompted when she hesitated. "I need to understand your expectations clearly." She met his gaze directly, not just professionally, but personally. Kent's expression softened. "My personal hopes and my professional offer are separate, Madeline. I want you as our teacher regardless of anything else that might develop between us." The careful phrasing gave her courage to press further. "And what do you hope might develop?" Instead of answering immediately, Kent took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Since the moment you risked yourself to save that child, I've been drawn to you in ways I can't fully explain." His voice was low, intimate. "I admire your mind, your courage, your gentle strength. I find myself wanting to know everything about you, what makes you laugh, what you dream about, what you fear." The raw honesty of his words left Madeline speechless. "I'm not offering marriage, not yet," he continued. "That would be presumptuous when we're still learning about each other. But I am asking for the chance to court you properly, to see if what I feel might grow into something enduring." Madeline's heart hammered. "The town will say you're only interested in me because I'm convenient, available when others weren't." "Let them talk," Kent said with sudden fierceness. "They've been wrong about you for years. Why should their opinion matter now?" The question struck her with unexpected force. "Why indeed? Because I've let it matter," she admitted quietly. "I accepted their judgment as truth for so long that I stopped seeing myself clearly." Kent's hand tightened on hers. "And now? Now I'm trying to see with my own eyes, to trust my own judgment." She looked up at him. "My judgment says you're a good man, Kent Galloway, one worth knowing better." His smile transformed his face, relief and joy mingling. "Then you'll accept both offers?" Madeline nodded, a weight lifting from her heart. "Yes, to both." The moment hung suspended between them, full of possibility. Then Kent stepped closer, his free hand rising to cradle her cheek. "May I kiss you, Madeline Everett?" She nodded, unable to find her voice. Kent bent his head slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When his lips touched hers, the gentleness of it nearly undid her. The kiss was brief, almost reverent, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, Kent rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the Harvest Festival." Madeline smiled, a newfound confidence flowing through her. "You hide it well." His laugh was warm against her skin. "Not according to my foreman. He says I've been mooning like a lovesick calf ever since meeting you." The ride back to the ranch was filled with easy conversation and shared laughter. They agreed on practical details. Madeline would give notice at the school board meeting the following week, arrange for her replacement, and move to the ranch by month's end. Until the teacher's cottage was completed, she would stay in a guest room in the main house. As for their personal relationship, they would proceed cautiously but openly. Kent would court her properly, visiting her in town when business took him there, and they would take time to know each other better before any formal commitment. When the time came to return to Timber Ridge, Madeline found herself reluctant to leave. The ranch already felt more welcoming than the town she'd called home for years. "It will be your home soon enough," Kent reminded her as he helped her into the buggy. 2 weeks will pass quickly." The journey back to town gave Madeline time to organize her thoughts. She anticipated resistance from the school board and knew gossip would intensify once her plans became known. For the first time, however, she found herself unconcerned by others' opinions. Mrs. Whitfield was waiting when she returned to the boarding house, eager for news. "You look different," the landlady observed, studying Madeline's face, decided somehow. "I am," Madeline confirmed. "I've accepted the teaching position. I'll be leaving at month's end." Mrs. Whitfield nodded, unsurprised. "And the young man, is he part of the decision?" Madeline felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We're getting to know each other." "Good," the older woman's approval was unexpected. About time someone saw what was right in front of them. The following days unfolded much as Madeline had anticipated. The school board meeting was contentious, with several members accusing her of abandoning her duties. Mayor Peterson was particularly vocal. "After all Timber Ridge has done for you," he said with thinly veiled hostility, "this is how you repay our generosity." Madeline stood her ground, explaining the educational opportunity the position represented and proposing her replacement, a qualified young woman who had assisted at the school the previous year. "Miss Everett has fulfilled her obligations admirably," Mr. Holloway intervened, having returned from Denver just days earlier. "She's entitled to pursue better opportunities, as any of us would." In the end, the board reluctantly accepted her resignation and approved her suggested replacement. As the meeting concluded, several parents approached to express genuine regret at her departure, surprising Madeline with their warmth. "You've been wonderful with our Billy," Mrs. Thompson said, squeezing her hand. "He'll miss you terribly." Such moments balanced the less pleasant aspects of her final weeks in Timber Ridge. True to his word, Kent visited twice, each time making his interest in her clear to the town through public gestures of respect and admiration. They dined together at the hotel restaurant, attended church side by side, and walked openly through town. The gossip was predictable. Some speculated that Kent was merely amusing himself with the novelty of courting the plain schoolteacher. Others suggested more cynical motives, that he needed someone malleable to manage his school, or that Madeline had somehow entrapped him. With each passing day, however, Madeline found herself caring less about such talk. The person she'd been, the woman who defined herself by others' perceptions, was fading, replaced by someone stronger, more certain of her own worth. On her final day of teaching, her students presented her with a handmade book of drawings and messages. Several children wept openly, while others promised to visit her at the ranch. The genuine affection moved Madeline deeply. "You've touched more lives than you realize, Mr. Holloway told her as they closed the schoolhouse. "That's a teacher's true legacy." The morning of her departure dawned clear and cold, with the first real threat of winter in the air. Kent arrived personally to transport her to the ranch, his happiness at her arrival evident in every gesture. Mrs. Whitfield and several well-wishers gathered to see her off, creating a moment of bittersweet farewell. As the buggy pulled away from Timber Ridge, Madeline felt a chapter of her life closing. She had arrived in this town as a grieving daughter, alone and adrift. She left as a woman with purpose, moving toward a future of her own choosing. "Having second thoughts?" Kent asked, noting her contemplative expression. "No," she said honestly, "just acknowledging the journey." He covered her gloved hand with his own. "It's only beginning, Madeline." The weeks that followed confirmed the wisdom of her decision. The ranch welcomed her warmly, and teaching began in earnest even before the schoolhouse was completed. Madeline found herself busier than ever, but with a sense of fulfillment that had been missing in Timber Ridge. Kent courted her with thoughtful attention rather than grand gestures. They rode together on weekends, exploring the ranch's vast acreage. In the evenings, they shared books and conversations by the fire, learning each other's minds and hearts. Mrs. Byron chaperoned discreetly, ensuring proprieties were observed despite their living under the same roof. By Christmas, the schoolhouse was completed, a handsome building with large windows, proper desks, a fine blackboard, and even a small library. Kent had spared no expense, fulfilling every request Madeline made for equipment and supplies. The holiday brought a celebration that united the entire ranch community. Workers and their families gathered in the main house for a feast and gift exchange that showcased the bonds Kent had fostered. Watching him interact with his employees, knowing their children's names, asking after family members, showing genuine concern for their welfare, Madeline's admiration deepened into something more profound. As they stood together after the festivities, watching snow fall beyond the windows, Kent turned to her with uncharacteristic nervousness. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in silver paper. "A Christmas gift." Inside lay a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When opened, it revealed a tiny, exquisitely rendered painting of the ranch's mountain view. "It's beautiful," Madeline breathed as he fastened it around her neck. "I had it commissioned from a painter in Helena." Kent's fingers lingered at her nape. "So you'll always carry this view with you." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved her deeply. "Thank you, I'll treasure it." Kent's expression grew serious. "Madeline, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, seeing you flourish here, it's confirmed everything I felt from our first meeting." Her heart quickened at his tone. "For me as well." "Then perhaps it's not too soon to speak of more permanent arrangements." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Madeline Everett. I believe I began falling in love with you the moment you risked yourself for that child, showing me the courage that defines you." The declaration, though not entirely unexpected after weeks of growing closeness, still left her breathless. "I love you too," she whispered, the words both frightening and freeing. "I think I was afraid to admit it, even to myself." "Afraid I couldn't truly see you?" he asked gently. "That I might be blinded by the same misconceptions as the town?" Yes, his perception, as always, humbled her, and afraid to trust my own judgment after accepting others' views for so long. Kent lifted her hand to his lips. "What does your judgment tell you now?" "That you're a remarkable man. That what we're building here, both the school and us, is worth everything." She smiled, newfound confidence steady within her. "That maybe I've never been plain at all, just unseen." "Not by me," Kent said fiercely. "Never by me." He kissed her then, with none of the restraint that had marked their previous embraces. Madeline responded with equal fervor, months of growing feelings finding expression at last. When they parted, Kent rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Madeline, be my wife, my partner in everything." The question required no thought. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to everything." They were married on a bright April morning, with the mountains still snow-capped but the valley beginning to green with spring promise. The ceremony took place in the new schoolhouse, transformed for the occasion with wildflowers and ribbon. Every family from the ranch attended, along with those from Timber Ridge who had genuinely wished Madeline well: Mr. Holloway, Mrs. Whitfield, and several former students and their parents. As Madeline walked toward Kent, wearing a gown of creamy satin trimmed with lace that Mrs. Byron had helped design, she felt the final transformation of the woman who had once believed herself plain and unnoticed. The love in Kent's eyes as he watched her approach confirmed what she now knew with certainty. Her worth had never depended on others' perceptions, only on her own belief in herself. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kent kissed her with a tenderness that promised a lifetime of being truly seen, truly valued. "Mrs. Galloway," he whispered against her lips, his voice filled with wonder. Madeline smiled up at the man who had recognized her worth when she'd forgotten it herself. "I liked the sound of that." As they walked back down the aisle together, past smiling faces and toward the future they would build, Madeline remembered the lonely young woman who had once believed the frontier was no place for love. How wrong she had been. Here in this harsh but beautiful land, she had found not only love but her true self, a woman of courage, intelligence, and deep capacity for joy. The plain schoolteacher of Timber Ridge had disappeared, replaced by Madeline Galloway, teacher, wife, and mistress of Galloway Ranch. Not because marriage had transformed her, but because love, both Kent's love and her own rediscovered self-love, had finally allowed her to see the truth that had always been there. She had never been plain at all. She had only been waiting to be truly seen.